Welcome to Book Lounge by Libby. I'm Joe, and I'm so happy you're here. This week, we are diving into the world of book covers and how they come to be. Joining me first to dive into designing the first impression, I've got Karina Granda and Erin Fitzsimmons. Welcome to you both. Hello.
Hello. Hi.
Thank you both so much for being here. To let our listeners get to know your voices, for anyone who's not watching and who is just listening, could you take a moment to introduce yourself, what you do, and maybe the most recent cover you've been a part of? Erin, I'm going to come to you first. I'm going to use the alphabet.
Okay, sounds great.
First letter E.
I am Erin Fitzsimmons. I am the Associate Creative Director for Adult and YA Fiction at Sourcebooks. I oversee the creative direction for the Sourcebooks Landmark, Poison Pen Press, Sourcebooks Fire, and a little bit of Stone Fruit and Cosmo Reads imprints, which is really fun, like an incredible mix of covers and ages and genres, and just wonderful mix of books that we get to design for. Most recent cover, oh gosh, the minute they get revealed, I forget
They're
about them.
They're out of your head.
They're out of my mind. But there's been so many. I mean, we're working on so many fun books right now. So I really focused on the ones I'm designing. But let's see.
That's fair. That's a tough question.
I can tell you one that I'm really excited about. It has been revealed and it's coming out in June, but it's one that we worked on for a very long time. It's called The Library of Flowers by Elsie Chu. And it was just one of those ones that came together kind of perfectly. And I'm so excited for that book to finally be on sale very soon. So
that's amazing. And Karina, hello.
Hi, I'm Karina Granda. I am an art director at Little Brown Books for Young Readers. And I mostly work on the novels team. So these days, my world is some middle grade, a lot of young adults. And we also recently launched a new adult imprint. New Adult is back.
New Adult is
called Invited. So that's the bulk of my job. Although I do love to take on a picture book, a graphic novel here and there. It's a good time. I try to keep a few on my list every year. And then, I mean, much like Erin, time does not exist for me. And I think that's because we work so far in advance in the process. So it's like what's coming out when sometimes gets a little lost for me. But I guess I'll just start with a book that's coming out this week, The Wicked Sea for Requited. It's the first new adult I worked on the list. It's coming out. It came out yesterday, I think. And it's just it was a really fun package because we did printed ends, we did a custom case, we worked with a couple of different artists, and it's just really robust and dark, but also pink and beautiful, and it's like feminine but scary, and it's all the things. And I really enjoyed working on it.
I love it. I love that New Adult is back, like you said, but also that we have words for it now. I feel like there's so much weird describing to have to do to just be like, well, this isn't quite YA, but this isn't for like our 35 plus. What is this? And I love that it's out there. How did you both get into this space? How did you get into design and marketing within publishing?
My path was, very convoluted. I had no idea book design was a thing. When I was, in school and going to college, I did not know it existed. I really wanted to be an artist. I really wanted to go to art school. That wasn't in the cards for me. But then I kind of made my way into photography and then photojournalism. That landed me at a publisher doing photo editing.
Oh, wow.
And just by sheer luck and chance, the art director there was like, hey, do you want to try designing a book cover? And I had no idea what he was talking about. Literally no idea. It's like, you mean putting the type on the cover? Sure. And then the minute it happened, I was hooked. I was like, oh, this is what I've been meant to be doing then. And it just stuck from there. And so that was how I kind of fumbled my way into book design. I'm so jealous of everyone that knew they wanted to be a book designer and went to graphic design school, because I did not. So I had to learn everything kind of on the job, which is a fun and also terrifying way to do things.
But tells people that you can find your path into what you
Absolutely.
want, regardless of the background and the training and the.
And it all plays into it. Like my photojournalism degree was really like a degree in storytelling. And so I use that every day in how I'm approaching covers and image research and image development. And
because it's storytelling, it's composition, all of those things have to lead into packaging and selling the book.
right. It's all one big story.
Yeah, I would agree. I also fumbled my way into it. I mean, I do think, I know that a lot of people go to graphic design school, and maybe some of those people at a time came out with a semblance that they wanted to do books. But I do think that it's a fairly recent trend because of the rise of these publishing programs and because of the rise of social media, for people to immediately be thinking of a book designer as a job, as a career that you could pursue in and of its own. Because I don't feel alone as someone that's my age and anyone older than me. And I say my age only because I do think that I took this job sort of right at the beginning of the blossoming of these publishing programs. It was fairly new. People didn't really even know what to make of them at the time. So people were graduating from them, but they didn't have like the prominence that they had now. I did not graduate from one of them, although I did go to NYU. And I think that I didn't really know what I wanted to do with my life. So I think that I spent a good amount of time just kind of experimenting. And one thing I will say is that I went to NYU, I went to the Gallatin School, which is like a very free experience.
I also went to Gallatin School,
Karina. There you go. And there's a few of us in publishing.
The freedom to just kind of follow your path,
right? Make it what you want.
Right. And I do think, and even saying all that, it was still a little bit of an accident because I graduated in 2011, which is right after the hiring freezes of 2009, 2010. And it was a little bit of luck I think I was applying to everything. I did some video interning for Time Out before internet video was really what it is now. We were kind of making it up as we went. They hired the interns to do it. So I feel like that gives you the state of things at the time. It was not, there was someone overseeing us, but it was not like a full department of video or anything like that.
Right. It was everyone's kind of like part-time hobby of
of
their full-time job. Yeah.
It's kind of amazing how many things were like, books were dead, and yet somehow I did get an internship at Simon & Schuster. I went to an NYU job fair and literally was just like resume. I don't want to move back home. I want to stay in New York. Whatever happens. And I did a couple of internships that summer. And the people at SNS were so wonderful. And I really do say that like even people that go to these publishing programs and even people that do graphic design work, so few of these programs really teach you how to make a book. It's really like an apprenticeship career, and they really took me in, and I learned so much. And an art director was leaving, and they didn't want to pay a lot of money, so they have hired me to fill a space, and here I am still because I couldn't leave, and it was great. Yeah.
But that's what we need sometimes. It's that like foot in the door to be like, I'll make it up later because I'm finally doing what I want to do.
Yeah.
And publishing's full of beautiful people that do teach you and help you along the way, for sure.
So I think that's really interesting that with both of you having kind of that free range experience in college, then going to like, what does the on-the-job training look like? What were your references? Where were you going? This is my inspiration. And yeah, I have like a million questions, but we'll start there. Where are you pulling from? What are, how long were you like cutting your teeth, so to speak? Do you remember what your first cover was or like the first books you worked on?
No, we don't show those first covers. Those first covers are buried very, very deep below. Although I will say I started, my first job was at a publisher, was actually the textbook publisher. It was fashion and interior design textbook. Very different, but like. But
at least pretty to make a cover for. I'm thinking like math textbook, but.
No. And this was Fairchild Books, which was owned by Condé Nast at the time. So we had access to the full Condé Nast library. I mean, I just sat there going through Condé Nast archives. Hour after hour. That was my job. It was fantastic. So those covers were fun to design. They were very aesthetically pleasing, but they weren't like a commercial book cover. And so when I knew I wanted to go over to kind of the commercial side of things, the fiction side of things, that was really hard to say, okay, I know I can design a book cover for fiction, but I don't have any of that. So I did a lot of like fake mock-up covers on my own to put in my portfolio. And then I do remember getting the first book cover I ever worked on was a book called Stone Fox, and it was the 30th anniversary edition of this book. And it's like one of those books that they tell you if you ever work in kids' books, or don't read the dog books because they're heartbreaking. And I made the mistake of reading that book, and I was like, what have I done? Like, why did I do this to myself?
Like, how do I make this a good cover that kids want to pick up?
But my art director at the time, he was brilliant. He had commissioned this incredible piece of art, so I just got to put type on it. And I was like, okay, now this is now fitting. It's type and image, and that's kind of the formula you then follow and adapt in different ways. So, the first covers were interesting, but you learn from everyone.
Yeah, I remember my first cover. It was a bind up for a bunch of romance novels.
Oh gosh, so many bind ups.
Called Struck. And that I was still becoming a graphic designer because I thought Helvetica was the perfect choice of font. And someone let me do that. And I look at that cover still, and I'm like, why did someone let me do that? This is awful.
And nothing screams, I went to art school in New York at the time that you were there. Then I put Helvetica on my first book jacket.
And it was a romance book. It had lights falling over an umbrella. Like, I look at it, I'm like, honestly, I can't believe anyone sent that to print. It was, we were all struck. We all saw the movie. It was a thing. Yeah.
Which we love that. So how would you say that roles have changed from then to now, if you're considering like days where art was being handed to you versus did you ever create art? When did you start creating art? And how has that morphed now from that? I mean, because there's a lot of career to happen between when you both started and where we're at now. How often are you getting commissioned work versus creating, or, what does your process look today versus then?
I think there's a lot less photography.
Yeah. Everything's kind of like animated. And I never know what to call it, but I'm thinking like an Emily Henry.
Illustrated for the most part.
Illustrated, yeah.
I think that at the time it was a lot of stock photography and even a good amount of photo shoots. And I haven't done a photo shoot in years.
It is actually kind of sad.
I did one last year. It was like my goal for the year. I was going to make a photo shoot happen, and we did it, and it turned out so great, but it's been...
And I actually think that there was a middle period before the huge illustration trend was in full swing, where I think I was doing even a little bit more of my own creating. Yeah. I think working on Love and Gelato was a good example of that time period, where I think a lot of us were doing our own creation. But I think that as the demand for illustration on these covers grew, both the demand on our time, we cannot illustrate them all, and also wanting various styles that better connect to different types of books. I think we do a lot of commissioned art now, a ton. Yeah.
That's cool though. I mean, does that feel good? Like, does that feel good, or does that like, I'm trying to find is there a balance between like, oh, it's a little scary to hire it out versus it's just cool because you're supporting like the art cycle?
I mean, I love it. I love doing it. I do sometimes feel like we've dismissed the moment for a really great photographic cover or a really great, like very simply illustrated cover, because there's so much demand to be like what's on the shelf. And I wish that we gave a little bit more space for some of those. But I do think that the illustration change makes sense in terms of like how much specificity we want, how we encounter art in other parts of life, not just in books. You work with really talented people. Yeah, sure, it doesn't always work out, but it works out most of the time.
Yeah. In adult, it still is a pretty good mix of photography. We do have a lot of photography still, and illustration, and it's different kinds of illustration. I worked at Harper for years in YA middle grade, and there it was all illustration. And so I definitely see on the kids side, it's much heavier on the illustration side. And it got to a point for me where I was like, I don't know how to solve this problem differently. Like we were kind of using all the same illustrators, and to me there was a lot of the same. And it was the main reason I really wanted to move to adult, because there's such a wide range of books and then cover styles. And even like on the Poison Pen imprint,
Oh, sure.
you know, you could approach a horror cover in so many different ways. It could be illustrated, it could be graphic, it could be photographic. You could do a photo shoot, and
It's
that
true.
kind of
Poison
problem
Pen
solving.
really does have a lot of like photograph. I'm thinking of like, there's one last quarter maybe that had like a carousel on the cover, but it was like a horror because it was like in a theme park kind of thing versus, you know.
Right. You definitely have the range to explore different types of directions. And so it's been good. And for that, you know, that's given me the opportunity to explore my own illustration style and trying to get into that. Because I think for me, the kind of shift happened. I don't know if you would say the same thing too, Karina, but like the iPad really unlocked like a skill set for me that I didn't have before. Like I cannot draw on pen and paper. I wish I could. I swear, this is why I wanted to go to art school. It wasn't in the cards for me. But then the moment I got my iPad, I was like, wait, I can draw on the iPad. Doesn't make any sense. All the true illustrators out there that work on pen and paper, I am so in awe of you, because I just can't. But then there's something about working on the iPad that feels more alike to design work, because it's more about composition and color and type and how that all works together. And I do a ton of hand lettering. And so I can kind of build it all in one place. And that's how my brain works. It doesn't kind of work like here's the art and then here's the type. It's all one thing. So I've gotten to do some illustration on covers lately. And that is just like, again, unlocking a new thing for me that I get to explore and work on. So really fun.
Yeah, you know, I feel like I'm still getting comfortable with drawing on an iPad, but I also feel like I don't really consider myself an illustrator. Like I consider myself someone that has illustrated.
Right,
you know?
right, exactly. Like I would never call myself an illustrator. I'm a designer.
I can accept that one as well, where I was like, I've scribbled on a piece of paper before, like, but I'm not an artist.
And sometimes for some reason that scribble will end up having a personality, or I can edit it enough, or I can like fine tune it enough that it'll be like precisely what I need for this cover. But I actually find that when somebody asks me to illustrate, I really need to like go deep into my soul and be like, can I do this in a Karina way or not? And I have to tell you that 80% of the time I just say no. I really do just say no. Like I think that it really has to just be this moment where I can see how I can like build it in either like very simple line or on paper, or like collage it out. Like I need to see the shapes in my head.
Exactly.
And if I don't see them immediately, it's over, because I know that once it has that level of like the precision of like where the arm is going to go, or if somebody's going to ask me for a different pose, like, or like anything, it's game over. You know, it's like I'm like the prototype, like AI, I spit something out, but you can't fix it. That's what it is. Like, you know, and like, hopefully you like it and that's all you got, you know? And I can edit it to an extent, but I can't like just give you like something else, which is why I love to commission art.
And it makes sense.
Are really good at that. Other people can do it really, really well.
Let someone else draw the hands.
Yeah, I can tell you what the hand needs to do really well. Like,
but no matter how many poses I do myself, I'm never gonna get it.
Yeah, like I found that like I'm really quite good at helping lead people to make the art we need for a book. But I don't know, it's not always by making it myself.
Conceptualizing, like that's such a unique and distinct skill that both of you are expressing here. I love that you both are like, no, we do this and we can come up with the whole creative, but we're not that thing. We are this own. Thinking of conceptualizing, when a new book comes across your desk, I love that phrase. I had to include it. I love saying, oh, it came across my desk. What? In all of my emails? Yeah, it came across my desk.
Gently across the table.
On my computer that's on my desk.
Exactly. See? There is logic in there. When a new book comes across your desk, what is the first thing you start to do to create what that cover looks like? What are some of those conversations with the marketing team, with the author? What does that look like before you dive in? Or do you have a bit of a template that is kind of like what's on trend right now?
I just got so giddy because this is my favorite part
Okay, good.
of the cover design process. Like
Yeah.
a new book on my desk, magically sliding across, is the most exciting part for me because it's like the possibilities are endless. It can go anywhere, and I get giddy when I get a new project. So I think all of them kind of I approach all of our covers a little bit differently. It depends on what is kind of available to start from. If there's a manuscript, I always want to start with the manuscript. I want to read, I want to get a feel for what the book is. And, we read so much that you can kind of see, okay, this is a little bit like that, but a little different in this way. And that helps you get a grasp on how it's not like these other things, especially when you do a lot of the same genre. You don't want it to all look the same. And so getting that, like, what makes this book unique from the very beginning is so important. And then, at Sourcebooks, we actually do have a kind of a templated start to our process that I think is really unique. We build mood boards for every single book that we're working on. And it starts sometimes from imagery that the author or the editor provides. I mean, authors love a Pinterest board. I love getting a Pinterest board from the authors. Yes, give it all to me. And then we build a mood board, and it's kind of one of my favorite things because there's like, 12 images in there, and I'm adding one and taking one out. And so the whole picture kind of forms of like, all right, this is the direction that I'm going towards. And I'm looking at the design comps and I'm looking at other competitive titles, but really, again, like, okay, we want to be in this shelf with these books, but how do we make this book feel unique and how do we set it apart? And for me, it all kind of starts there. And I love that our team has that as part of their process that they work from.
Wow. Yeah.
We don't do that at all.
It kind of is. I had never seen it before Sourcebooks, and I love it. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, I feel like generally for every book, we do get like a cover summary form that has like a summary and some details from the book and the comp titles, like you said, like what space is this supposed to live in, which I don't think is supposed to be prescriptive, but just gives you an idea of like where it should sit on the shelf. We want to do something obviously our own with it. And if I'm like you, like if there's a manuscript, that's exactly what I want.
Mm-hmm.
And generally what I like to do is I skim the cover summary form, but don't really read it. Like I kind of just look at it in 2 minutes. Like I don't want to know too much.
You're trying to find that general placement so that ideas can start. It's the like, oh, I know the base of this recipe. I know that it needs to be romantasy. So I'm looking for like XYZ, or it's botanical adjacent,
right?
But
or
just
like
a
it's
taste.
Competing with this other book is sometimes good knowledge to have, not because I'm trying to be like that other book, because I'm not, but I do think that like we work in art, which is great, but we also work in business, which is true, and
right.
And I say that in 2 ways. Like we have to sell books, but we also have to work with other people, right? And sometimes just knowing what everybody else is already thinking, even if you're gonna bring your own thing to it, even if you're going to say, how about what this other thing is? I do think there's a sort of, it's good to know what other people are already thinking, because sometimes conversations have been had that you have not been part of. And like knowing what that is sort of a good thing to get into. But I also don't want to feel like handcuffed by it. So like I'll do a very quick skim of the cover summary form that tells me of like, this is already like what the editor and the author has sort of been throwing out there, maybe a couple of covers that were comped in an acquisitions meeting or something like that. And then I'll actually read the manuscript if it's available or whatever pages are available. And then I'll go back and actually read the cover summary form. And I would say that the creative process kind of happens in like a liminal space between there. As I'm reading, often I'll be jotting down just words like an icon that will make sense or a mood that will make sense, or even just a little like the most rudimentary doodle of a thumbnail of a cover. Or even like if I know an artist, like suddenly like some scene will remind me of an artist. So literally it's the biggest like iPad mashup of words that only I can read, little doodles and artist names. And then I'll take it more seriously to my computer and expand from there. Yeah.
That's really cool, though. I love seeing both sides, and that regardless of the general process, you're both like, I need to get into the book. I need to know what the meat and potatoes are here. 2 questions. How intensely are you reading, and how many books do you end up reading a year this way? Or are you doing some skimming? And then second to that, well, let's answer that one first. We'll start there. Do you read all of them completely? Do you stop when you kind of have a good point? Do do you return to them later?
I think I kind of stop when I have a good point, unless I'm like
do the same
really
thing.
hooked, you know? And there are definitely books where I'm like, I have to finish this book. Rest of the books, have to wait, until I'm done. And I have that one now where I've already developed a first round of concepts, but I just love the story and I need to see where it goes. And I'm like, maybe this will help me kind of see where we go next from here.
Finalize it out,
I actually don't know how many books I read.
That's fair. No,
year.
that's
I have
because
no idea.
That's a tough one to answer when you're both like kind of skim, kind of dive in, 50-50.
I think it's more or less than you think, because I think that the thing that we're ignoring is that there's a whole chunk of books that you don't have a manuscript for.
Right.
And especially series, especially in series. So I'm really locked tight on a lot of series.
And then you can kind of work from those details that you get.
Yeah. So we sort of have a structure of what the cover is. And sometimes because of the timeline that these authors are working on, and the timeline at which we need a cover,
we're
really relying on them to help fill in the template of what that series
once you kind of develop that series template, then you're saying, okay, you've seen what book 1 and 2 look like. What does book 3 look like in your mind? What's the piece of imagery we're pulling, kind of thing?
Because generally on a series, there's 1 or 2 elements that we're changing, whether it's the setting or the main icon or the color or whatever it might be. So usually we can work with an author without having to have the full manuscript to do that. So that's really helpful. And some books I get to the end, I find that sometimes the books that I get to the end on are the ones where I'm really at a loss. But I also think that part of the reason I don't feel the need to get to the end all the time is because as a reader, I want that moment of what is it in the first third or half of the story that really made me want to pick this up? I don't want the end. I don't want the end of the book.
Right.
I want
you don't want to spoil it on the cover.
That's so true.
That's going to cause that intrigue. So I think that sometimes if I do something that's too far to the end of the book, it's not even what the cover should be anyway.
Right. That's almost when you're looking at book 2. If there is a second book to go with that you're like, oh, here we are.
Yeah.
How far ahead are you usually in the process? Because if there are oftentimes where you're getting pages and not a full manuscript, or it's a manuscript in process of editing, are you oftentimes creating a cover when there's hardly a complete book? I mean, of course, there was enough for them to sign, but...
Most of the time.
Okay.
You would think most of the time there is. Sometimes there's not a complete book. Sometimes it's an outline, a very long synopsis, a pitch, and we're kind of working. It depends, it all depends on kind of what the plan and the positioning for the book is. Especially at Sourcebooks, we love a fast to market kind of approach, which is not my imprints all of the time, but I think Poison Pen does have a few of those. Frida McFadden and LJ Ross fall into that category of we acquired these books and we want to get them out fast. And
you said name number 1. Frida is keeping you busy.
Frida is keeping me busy. And I love working on Frida's books. And when those came in, it was you don't have time to really wrap your head around too much of it.
There's your photography, right?
There's the photography. Yeah, absolutely.
You said it now and I'm like, oh, didn't I just get one that was the wedding cake topper in the mail?
That's what we did the photo shoot on. I needed to do a photo shoot. I looked so hard to find the perfect cracked wedding cake topper. Yep. Could not find it. And I was like, I can shoot this. I know I can shoot this. Yeah. And, it's not something that's done a lot now. I had to really hold everyone's hands and say, we can do this. I can do this. I promise. Yeah.
I love that you did it on the fastest turnaround person. You're like, I'm going to make a photo shoot for Frida McFadden.
Yeah. Well, you turn to your tried and true photographer and you're like, we need to nail this. And she got it. And
in an hour and a half. Because the next book's coming in tonight.
It's amazing, though. You don't know which books are going to be fast or slow, I find.
True.
In terms of the process. Some covers come together so fast and some are a struggle. And I can't always tell you what it is. And I feel like sometimes people have the assumption of oh, it's because it's a big author, because it's a new author, because this, that, the other. I'm like, it sometimes has nothing to do with that.
Right. It's the plan and like
Yeah.
what the opportunity is and how quick they want to kind of capitalize on a trend or something that's working in the market. And that's completely out of our control as the cover team, where it's like, okay, well, we just have to respond to that. And in those timelines, we're working really, short term. But then we have books, and I'm sure you, Karina, too, have books that are like, I'm working fully on summer 2027. I have some books on fall 2027.
Yeah.
So like we're so far in the future. No one's going to see those covers for like, a year if I'm lucky. So
I'd say
I mean, I get a
average-
box from Sourcebooks about December that I'll see them soon. But
I think average is a year. I would say the most books are happening a year in advance. And generally, most of those books are in the editing process, but they're fairly complete. And I think that then, yes, we have our outliers, like things that are crashing through, things that we know are going to be late. Sometimes you have something that moved seasons, so it's very done. It's very, very done. But I would say that, like, talking to the books that happen really fast, they are usually happening with books where like the whole book is there. We see the vision. This author, the words aren't there. For some reason, the words are not there, either because time or they were working on book 2 and this is book 3 or whatever it is. But like, it's a little different than having to start from, I know it sounds like we're starting from zero, but we're often not starting from zero, because it's often books that the whole reason they were acquired is either because it's visible through the outline or it's working with an author or a series where you can see it, even if you haven't read it.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So there's got to be a lot of voices in this process. How often do you have to completely redo a cover? How many times do you have like crazy conversations? Or when things come to you, is it a little more like, this is what we're aiming for, we trust you, and they send it back for like a correction or an edit?
Rarely.
I would say that's rare. Those are the unicorn authors that we protect at all costs. And I mean, there are a lot of voices. It's from the beginning, it's editorial and the author are involved. We loop in our marketing and sales teams very early in our process, so they're involved in all the cover development conversations. Then it kind of goes to like the publisher and the broader level. Beyond that, we have retailer markets that are weighing in on our covers. We're showing our key retailers covers. I think that tends to be when things. It's usually around that time where like you're done and you get to like sales conference and you're showing a retailer, and then all of a sudden it's like, whoa, no, this is not what we had in mind for this cover at all. And that's when the redos come, which is kind of late in the process. What I found, and it can be challenging because then you've now you have to make up all that time that you
lost effectively. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's stressful when it happens.
It sounds
but I
like
find
that.
it happens in waves. And I've tried to come up in theories about this. I feel like we have seasons. I have a theory, but I'm not sure if it's true. But I find that,
I want to hear it.
Yes, it's normal for a cover to get killed, or even a couple of covers to get killed within a group. We work on a lot of covers. That does happen. But it does feel like some seasons go very, very smoothly. And some seasons, it feels like I should just quit. I don't even know how to do my job. Like every cover has been killed.
For me, that's fall. I don't know if that's the same. It's like fall is such a critical season in publishing, it seems like. And the fall covers we struggle with.
Yeah.
It's that like pre-gifting season and
gifting and like back to school, and everyone's like hyped up to go buy books, and the covers matter more.
And also we're working on fall in the fall. It's just the fall the year before. So maybe everyone's a little like stressed. I don't know.
Right. Because
I don't know.
Like what if pumpkin spice is suddenly out, but a year ago we were still loving it. And
exactly.
That's one theory. I feel like another theory is that I have is that like, because it's exactly that, is that like the trends don't change all the time, but every once in a while you'll have been working on something and the trend will change. And then,
or a new book
that's why
will come
trend chasing
out.
is hard.
Yeah, a new book will come out and it like changes the comps all of a sudden. You're like,
sure.
Now Fourth Wing has taken off and now everything has to look like Fourth Wing. It's like, okay.
That's exactly my theory. And it's an interesting move because it's like, the truth is that sometimes I feel like we don't know anything, you know, like sometimes you look at these covers, and for X and Y reason, maybe they're even great covers. You know why on your team that would have never been approved. But suddenly it's out there and now it's part of the conversation. And I always find that that's really challenging sometimes to backtrack in that way, because it's like you're backtracking to a new trend, but you're also backtracking on opinions that people already had that maybe they are in lifetime changing also.
Wow. So when those comps are changing, you are pivoting, even if like, because in the example of Fourth Wing, yeah, gorgeous cover, but is it because the book was just wildly successful, or was it the cover? And so like, is it then dangerous to like chase that look? Because yes, it'll blend the comps and people go, oh, well, this looks like that. But you know, it doesn't necessarily guarantee the same success.
Yeah. Right. And that happens all the time. I mean, I remember like Eleanor in Park was a big one where you just couldn't get rid of it. Like, I mean, it's a great cover. There's nothing wrong with that cover. But
you said it and I could see it. That's how you know it was like in there.
And I just feel like every once in a while there's just this cover that happens and they did it. And I'm like, guys, well, like, you can't do it again.
Right.
Like it happened. Good for them. Like
what? But like how? What I want to know is like, how did it happen? Right? Like how? Because Eleanor in Park and like Fault in Our Stars came out. Like those covers were
they came out basically the same year.
There was like nothing in the YA space at the time, and I'm always like, okay, well, how do we design that cover? Like how do we design the thing that breaks everyone else's comp boards and is the thing that other people start to chase? And that if anyone knows the magic secret, tell me, because I think that's the hardest thing, because we always are looking at what's selling right now and what's popular right now, but we're designing a year out. So trying to bridge that gap on how do we look to the future and try to be the next trendsetter, it's very hard. We don't know. It's a little bit of like just throwing things at the wall.
Right. Or have to like can a titles or can a cover so that way you could try a new trend like closer to market, or, you know, like.
Right. I mean, and I think that's the reason why Library Flowers kind of sticks out in my mind for that exact reason, is that we worked on the cover so far in advance. And then we did kind of shift the pub date to maximize the pub positioning. And when we were bringing that book out. And so the cover was done for months. And every time it came back into a meeting, I was like, oh, please don't kill this cover. Like, I love this cover so much. But I realized that trends change. And in the time that I'd worked on that cover, so many other books had been published and came out. And I was just nervous that my cover that I had designed a year and a half ago was not going to be relevant anymore. And so when that kind of sticks and it holds and it still feels like it fits in the space, it's like you've won the lottery a little bit. Like, okay, yes, we made it here. And hopefully, you know, we did the thing.
Yeah, 100%. And I think the thing that like I'm trying to resist lately, or create resistance rather, is when people say like, oh, well, like maybe that's good because it like fits, or maybe that's whatever. Like, it's like, maybe we don't want to fit like quite so much. Or when you show a series of options and like everyone's like, well, B is safest, so let's do B. It's like, well, maybe we don't want to do B. Like, how about maybe I don't think any of these books that break the trend did anything safe.
Right.
So I think it has to be the right book. It has to be the right moment. I understand that, because not every book is going to break out. But I do think that maybe in a given list, we should start a goal that at
this has been my dream. Like
one or two books has to be unsafe. You know, you have to make an unsafe cover choice.
Take the leap. Yes.
Right. Like there's 12 books. One of them has to be unsafe. I would love that. I'm going to bring this to the team.
Like,
but it also sounds
Hachette
like
and Sourcebooks are on
we're going to do it. We're going to have
board.
one book that's unsafe every season.
Well, and so it sounds like you not only need like your internal teams, the authors have to be willing to take that swing as well, because they probably just want they want their book to just be successful. And that may look like picking the safe option because their readers will know exactly what they're picking up and they don't have to take a chance on it. Like, you know, but so you kind of need every star to align to take that risk today.
Yes, that's true.
Well, I know I have to let you both go soon, but I would love to hear some like trends versus timelessness, because I'm thinking now of Eleanor and Park and of, John Green's Fault in Our Stars. And that to me seems like a bit of the transition that took us to some of the illustrated covers today.
Mhm.
Well, yes, they
Mhm.
broke then. That eventually translated into our current trends. And like you think
Mhm.
of the 70s pulp paperbacks that are resurfacing in an updated image today with a
Mhm.
lot of horror, especially. What are some of the trends you're seeing everywhere right now? And are there any that you think are next that are you feeling a shift, or what do you hope to shift?
I feel like more seeing things that I'm like, it has to be out soon, right?
Okay.
Like
Yeah.
really colorful, busy background with giant white type has to be out soon. There's too much.
I
I
think
can't
we
even tell them
reached
apart.
saturation on that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think
I
we've
I
reached
could agree
market
with.
saturation on that for
Yeah.
sure.
We've
And
got to shake up the shelves at least a little bit.
Yeah.
yeah. And I know there were a couple like cover design trend pieces about this trend last year, but like kind of using a vintage painting and antique painting and then throwing some neon kind of gothic lettering over it that was so cool and so fresh at the time. And then everyone was like, yeah, let's do that. And then it got done so much that I think we've kind of reached saturation on that. But
Can
I
I say
think,
something about this? My wedding
yes,
invitations in 2017 were
tell
old,
us.
like Catskills paintings with pink spray paint. We spray
There you
painted them
go.
ourselves.
Yeah.
And it is so funny
Started that
because
trend.
my husband, I mean, he is a writer, but he's not a designer at all. So we spend a lot of time at bookstores for different reasons, but he's not always picking up on like what the cover trend is or something like this. And then it was about a year ago, and he goes, "Does every book cover look like our wedding invitation?"
That's how you know you've reached saturation. The non-designers
and it
have
was,
caught it.
and this was in 2017. And honestly, I do think they were fairly unique at the time, but it is so crazy because I feel like at the time, if I had tried to do a book cover like that, nobody would have taken it. And now you can't get enough of it. So like there's magic. There's magic to the moment when people want it.
Yeah. And I think, if you do have the author and the team that's willing to push the trend a little bit, that's where the new trends come out of. So, what do we like about that, but how can we push it a little bit further? Like maybe it's more photography, or maybe it's different typography, and just trying to find those moments where you can kind of move an inch
Yeah.
in a different direction and get everyone on board. And that's how, eventually you get some new trends.
Mhm.
What do you both think about the trend of special editions, sprayed edges? Erin, I'm thinking of Michelle Yavis Corpora's like the gorgeous, and
I
the
have a
fact
right up
that
here.
that Sourcebooks printed that all of editions of that were the special. There was no like pick this or that. Like,
Uh,
what are you
yeah.
both thinking about that? What kind of do you have to work on the design for the edges? Like, what does that look like?
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's kind of magical. Like we especially we've been in publishing for so long, and you really just had your front cover, your jacket. That was pretty much it. Maybe if you were lucky, you got to design some end papers or some internal pages, but having another kind of part of the package to design for like unlocked a lot of things, I think, in the book design world and just in creativity and how we approach the book as a package. And it's kind of dying down. We're doing less and less of them, sadly. Like, I mean, it was a peak. Every book was getting edges, and it got to the point where I was like, I don't know what new things to do on the edges. I think we might have used all the ideas, and
Oh God, not every book now, please.
a little bit of that. I mean, I love them. I think they're beautiful. But it was like, okay, another problem to kind of solve, another creative thing you have to come up with. And sometimes there's things you can pull from the early stages of cover development that you're like, oh, we had this great idea, but it doesn't make sense for a cover. And that's kind of where the edges for His Face is the Sun came. The artist, Tom, had these incredible pattern. And I was like, it's way too busy for a cover, but it looked amazing on the edges. And so you get to save those parts of the cover development that you love, but they won't work for the front cover. That's also been kind of fun. It's just, thinking about things in different ways and using your brain to kind of unlock different, creative solutions for a book.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It's been really, really fun. And I hope we do more of them. But I do think that we do too many at once. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, because at a certain point of like the whole idea is that this is a special package. Is it special if they're all special? And I do think that unfortunately, I do a lot of bookstore visits to like at what's out there. And you do start to see some packages where it starts to feel like a stretch, like you had to do the edges or you had to do the end papers or they're all looking the same, or I can tell that you had to do these in 2 weeks because the printer deadlines on deluxe editions is crazy. And I do think that we need to find the balance of when it makes sense to do it so that we could put all our beautiful energy into making it worthwhile.
This has all made me think of, do you have to think of basically the whole book? And not just in the like sprayed edges or like the design kind of side. When you are designing the cover, are you responsible for kind of like what it's going to, like the final bind will look like, back cover, insides, or not too much?
Yeah.
It depends on the project. For us, we have a team that handles our full cover production. So sometimes we're passing that off to them. But for things like His Face is the Sun, we designed that whole package from the very beginning. We knew that we were looking at big specs and we wanted the end sheets and the map and all the things had to kind of work together. So it makes sense to have the art director work on all of that from the very beginning. So you get that cohesive design.
And some of these things are a live process. Like sometimes you suddenly find out you have end papers or something like that. And you're working
the expectations
a little
change.
bit. So sometimes you know right away that it's a full package, and it's nice to know that all at once. And another way that design works is a lot of times, when I know that it works differently in some adult teams, but in almost every children's book group that I know of, your art director, yes, they might have someone helping them, but it's a really close-knit relationship. So we have junior designers and design assistants that sometimes are helping flesh out, like you said, like the back covers and the flaps and all that type of stuff. And it's a great place for them to develop their design skills, and they're working really closely with us to do that. So it may not be a single person, but it is a single team.
Mm-hmm.
That's where the collaboration really comes into play.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Karina, Erin, thank you both so much for taking the time to join me today.
Thank you.
Fun.
So fun.
Yes.
And friends, we're now going to head into our next segment. Now joining me are Ryan Willwerscheid and Kathryn English. Welcome. Thanks for coming on the podcast today.
Of course, always down to talk about some books.
I'm so excited to have you both. If you could, for the people who are not watching and just listening, share your name, what you do, and maybe some of your favorite projects of the past year. I know it's a hard answer because you're working on so many things, and some you could have worked on a year ago that are just coming out now, but just so our audience knows who's who. Kathryn, you want to go first for me?
Yeah, I'm Kathryn Galloway English. Sounds like a very big, fancy name, but I'm very stubborn about keeping my maiden name.
Fair.
I've been working with Blackstone Publishing for 23 years. I got a job right out of college when we were just a tiny little audiobooks company, and have been here as we've grown rapidly and impressively.
Wow.
I've done a lot of things. I probably have covers in the thousands at this point. And trying to think of my most favorites. But last year we did a Dracula version, which I have a copy of because it's really pretty.
Wow.
It's got all the pretty fancy things, and it's fully illustrated. Yeah, it's great. That's probably my number one favorite thing I've worked on. And it was a passion project.
No, that's incredible.
Yeah, but I've done, it's really hard to list. So I'm going to have to just go there because you're going to get a list
great.
of 20. I'm going to take up Ryan's time.
Yes. Ryan, how about you?
Yeah, well, I've got less. I started at Podium Entertainment. So I started there 5 years ago. When I started, it was a company of I think 12 people. We've grown to over 80. We've grown super, super fast. We started also as an audiobook company, and we specialize in sci-fi, fantasy. We've gotten into romance. And one of our bread and butter genres is something called lit RPG. I don't know. It's an insider thing, but that's mostly what I worked on. So He Who Fights with Monsters is kind of the biggest book that I worked on. It was actually one of the first books I ever worked on, and it turned out to be a huge hit. So, if you know lit RPG, you'll know a lot of the books I've worked on. We're starting to get into romance quite a bit more, but Yeah, I actually come from an entertainment background. So I worked at a film company before a film company startup before this. And I transitioned into publishing to explore the audio side of things. And we've expanded into like a full publishing company. And that's how we got into book covers. So I have a different background than most of the other, bookish people that you're going to talk to on your podcast.
It's true, but I love that. I find that a lot lately. We have our streaming video platform Canopy as well. And so I always find these weird moments of crossover where film and books combine. My incredible editor for this podcast worked for Turner Classic for a lot of years. So it's always you never know where you're going to find your like book film combos.
Yeah, especially in LA. There's like a handful of publishers in LA, a whole lot of film studios.
Yeah, well, right. You're definitely in the more rare in LA to be the publisher. Now, I want to know how you both approach design for your covers when you're making things, when you're thinking about marketing and promoting them. Does it depend on the format you're looking at? Are you thinking of, like, Kathryn, the book you picked up, gorgeous? That is like the print experience, but do you think of the digital experience? Do you think of the audiobook experience to both of you?
My origins are in audiobook design. And when we were very young as a company, we spent a lot of time trying to make really special products, especially for retail. And I remember at one point we did a King Kong special edition where we had like fully printed CDs and like the MP3s were really fancy. And it was like a big deal. And we tried to do things like incorporate art and stuff in PDFs. And those are more difficult to include with downloads. I think it's better now. There are a lot more platforms that can handle it. When we are designing our books, we do have to keep in mind ebooks because they're such a massive part of the market. But for me, like I've always been obsessed with books. Like I don't even know how I ended up in this job, to be honest. Like I went to college thinking I was going to be an animator and then bailed and somehow thought I was going to work for like a speaker company because I picked up an ad in the newspaper.
It's how it goes.
And then somehow I'm doing this totally awesome thing. But when I approach the books, like I'm coming from it from what I want to see. And especially like when we're working on Dracula, we have so many elements going on in here. We have illustrated end sheets, like all the chapter pages have special things. And you can't always include the, really fancy designs that we put on the pages of the book into the e-readers because they don't translate very well. And I am an obsessive e-reader. And so I like to have it on the dark mode.
Oh,
so
sure.
like I really get annoyed when I can't. And they've got like these like chunky pieces. So
you really can't do much with the way you're reading them. Yeah.
No, right? And we have been trying to investigate ways of making it more flexible, but there's just not really, I don't think the technology's there. When we are making our books, we try to keep in mind of what we can translate and what we can't. Like, so there are some illustrations in the book that are more integrated into the text that are not going to translate into the ebook that we just have to cut. And so the images that are just square, those can go in pretty well and you can expand them and stuff. But yeah, we do have to keep in mind a lot of what we're doing. It's difficult to kind of translate that stuff into the audiobooks. I feel like that's just like a completely different kind of, medium, I guess.
No, it's such a different world. And Ryan, I'm very curious to hear how like the ebook or the audiobook experience works for Podium and how what's being created there plays into your designs.
We sort of look at these creators like a small business, right? I mean, these covers are their brand and it needs to work across all the different formats. If an ebook reader sees an audiobook being promoted, it should look similar. They should be able to go out and find it, right? So from an actual cover perspective, there isn't a huge amount of difference, right? Like the actual displayed product. I mean, you need to keep in mind, right, that one's a square and one's rectangle.
Right.
But beyond that, it's really more about the author brand and making things feel very cohesive across the digital ecosystem because you want it to be a recognizable thing. And I think I think we've seen more and more these book covers become more akin to like brand systems that you'll see a company make, where it needs to translate onto a tote bag and it needs to work at a convention and it needs to be simple and recognizable and work across a various amount of sizes. And I think that digital aspect of it has really changed that approach to it, right? Like, I don't know if you saw maybe it's old now, but the yellow face marketing was, written up everywhere because it was such a striking cover and it worked across everything, right? So, when we try not to pay attention more as much to the specific format, that sort of granular thinking, because it really is more about, the content and author brand and what it's representing.
Got it. It's not so much about, right. It is the basic of like audiobook square, ebook rectangle. But
Right.
at the end of the day, you're looking almost in like a creative design suite. You're looking at that. How does this kind of like escalate when we're posting it on Instagram? How does this look when they need to promote it here, when it's in their booth at a random show and now it's a pop-up banner and now it's like a backdrop? You're almost approaching, like you said, from a brand and full scope design.
Yeah. That's typically how we like to think about it, right? I mean, it's a product launch, right? So, and as far as the actual interior content, right? Of course, that we get special illustrations and done like that, but strictly from a cover perspective, I mean, it's crazy. It's crazy how many things you got to use the cover for when you're promoting it.
Yes, that is correct.
Yeah.
Do you think though, I think that there are specific genres too that really lend themselves to having that like logo type identity, where there are some that, have a lot more flexibility and, being a little bit more loose. But I do think that you're right. Like we have a series of Helldivers and it was originally supposed to be a trilogy and it's now like a 13 book series with a bunch of spinoffs. And, the title that I created for book one has become like the logo for it, and it is used all over the place. And my kids have T-shirts that they wear with them. It's like it's like a whole thing. Yeah,
it turned into a word mark for you rather
it
than.
It really did. Mm-hmm. And that I think it's very specific to certain books, but I think that's a very huge part of it, making something immediately recognizable.
Yeah. This was something I was thinking about. People almost, for certain fan-driven types of content, like especially in like that sci-fi and fantasy space, the fandom it's everything. I mean, it's become. I mean, that's what fans want, right? If they read something, they get really excited about it. They want more, right? They want to represent. They want to represent themselves with it. They want to tell their friends about it.
I think you're right, specifically about genres, because I'm thinking about like the romance book market right now.
Illustrated covers.
The change. Oh yeah, like this huge change in direction that those books have taken. And for the most part, I think it's great because they make them more approachable. I think sometimes they can be misleading. I don't think it's appropriate for every specific genre within the romance market. But I think they're great, especially for like the rom-coms. Like it didn't make sense to have these like super serious buff guys and these, when they're like,
we don't need Fabio for an
No.
Emily Henry for a rom-com for like a light and fluffy. We need that animated almost illustration.
Yeah. Well, I think it also like kind of alienated parts of the market too, because if it's just like these very like heterosis, like kind of, macho covers, it kind of eliminates guys from even wanting to pick them up. And, one of the conversations I've had with my husband is like, he was like, I don't understand why they don't make romance books for guys. And I was like, what? Well, I was like, what do you mean? Like, why does it have to be for guys? I was like, there's nothing in this book that like you couldn't read. It's a dual POV. Like you could, but I do think the covers will make it seem like, it's
the like dude wipes branding of it all.
Absolutely.
kind of thing to just be like, find somewhere in the middle. But that's such a good point. The approachability when it comes to design. And Ryan, I do want to go back to your fandom point.
I forgot where I left off, but basically what I was saying is that one thing I've noticed is that these people almost use these as like fashion accessories. Like you got to realize when you go out into the world and you're putting a big book in front of your face, right? Or it's on the bus or whatever in public. I mean, it's saying something about you. So to go to like the romance cover point, right? It sometimes people get embarrassed to put those big, right? Those big,
Absolutely.
ad
And
covers.
they have those discreet covers now. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. In front of their face out in public. I mean, a lot of things are digital, but when it comes to like a physical book, the culture of the thing actually matters. I mean, I've actually, when I was researching a lot of like the social content and stuff, there's people who pick outfits based on their books. You know what I mean? They create content based on the cover design. I mean, the range of ways that people use these covers is really cool. And I think it's interesting to note that, I mean, it does kind of become part of their identity. If they're like a huge fan of something, kind of becomes part of them and something that they want to share with the world. So it's an interesting aspect about book design that I never really considered until I got really deep into the space.
I think especially like with TikTok too, like there are all these creators and it really does become part of their identity. Like the way that you see people like setting up their aesthetic around books and stuff. And, I think our marketing department tries to incorporate that somewhat, but like, I can't always keep that stuff in mind when I'm designing because a lot of times it isn't even a matter of like future thinking. It's like, what does the author want? And because we're a smaller company, that ends up being more of our priority versus like the bigger publishers who like have a whole marketing campaign and can like drive, focus in a certain way. But we're trying to make the authors feel seen and make sure that they're getting their work presented in a way that they want. And sometimes that doesn't always fly with trends, but it's interesting to see also sometimes the audience will pick it up and just be stoked because of how it's come about or what it looks like and how they incorporate that into their, social media presence or whatever.
Well, yeah, because I think social media, TikTok specifically, has really democratized the term you used, creator, because you can have no followers and it can be your own journal and you are still a creator. And I love that element of TikTok
absolutely.
because you might be the first person to see that video or like the third person. And there's something really both weird and amazing about being on the ground floor. I love when I get to use business sounding terms for such a silly thing, but like there's something fun about that. And to see people who will be so dedicated of like, even when it's the aesthetic refrigerator reset, here's all my fancy ices that I made in special trays, like, or down to I pick my outfit based on my book. It's just like, that to me is incredible. And so that also makes me want to ask, like, where do you both find the inspiration when you're making covers? To your point of like, what does that process look like? How are you listening to the author? Where are you taking input from? And how do you have to fight against kind of like the rise of online browsing and, how covers may be looking different now than they were even 5 years ago?
Oh, yeah. I think the pandemic changed everything about how books look now. I mean, in previous years, everything was so trend focused. Like I remember there were chunks of time where we'd be like, there's a certain way that typography looks. That's what the consumer wants. There's a certain style of illustration. That's what the consumer wants. And after, I don't even know if it's the pandemic that really like spurred it or if it's just.
Well, it brought more people to books or back to books. Like, I think there's probably like a matching like literacy rise with the pandemic just because everyone went, I'll try it. Like I can still borrow books. I can still go out and buy them or have them delivered. So I think people were forced to consume. And then on the flip side, TikTok blew up. So then we could hear them saying, I wish it didn't look like that. Or I wish, like that cover makes me feel goofy.
Yeah. Well, there's so much individualization, I think, in so much of the content we consume. Like when I was a kid, everybody watched the same show. Everybody listened to kind of the same music. And my kids, they like this YouTube generation where like they have very niche interests and like they have small groups of friends, but not everybody in their school is like doing the same thing. So I think that's kind of what's happened with a lot of design and with books, and is that they've become just kind of specific to the book rather than like trying to engage in a certain cultural movement or whatever.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think the industry as a whole has become so much more creator driven, author driven. A lot less controlling hands by the publishers, a lot more publishers. Like it sounds like Blackstone's pretty similar to Podium, is that we understand that these authors, they're entrepreneurs, they're small businesses, and that they should have input into what their brand is going to be, right? We always focus on the big title, but there's another big name on that front cover, and that's the author, and that cover is going to represent them as well. So it's important to us that we bring them into the process. So we typically work really closely with the author and what their vision is going to be, and we try to help that guide them into something that's going to be optimized, right, or high performance, or whatever you want to call it. Really nice typography, and we lend our design expertise to it, but we really do try to work pretty closely with the creators because, listen, they're sophisticated nowadays. I mean, a lot of the studies that I read are done by indie authors, right? They're doing click testing on their own covers, and it's giving publishers good data, right? So, it's become. I think that's a huge shift. Is just the entrepreneurialism of the creators nowadays, and we want to be there to amplify that and to support it, right? I think there's kind of this stereotype of publishers, like we're going to take your book and do whatever we want with it, but
I think that's the perks of being an indie publisher, though, is that, especially for authors, is that they have a lot more control.
That's what I'm really curious by. For both of you working in kind of more of the indie space, do you still have to, like, Ryan, you said it, or at least alluded to it, of like, we push you in the direction of what some of the trends are doing, but we're still listening to you. How much do you have to still try to get those signals out there? Like, we know if you're selling a romantasy, there's likely a lot of flowers and a sword on the cover. Like, I'm trying to think of what's trending right now. Like, how often are you pushing those elements, or does it, does the team sit down and go, here's our first pass that matches trends and what we heard from you. Now, what are your feedback, or what is like this design process look for the two of you?
Yeah, I can speak on that. So I think really it gets down to, when you design something, you're insinuating it's created for a purpose. And I think that purpose with a book cover is twofold. Is first, you need to communicate information. It's not the sexy part of it, but you need to communicate what something is. I mean, that's just an aspect of a book cover. And of course, the second part of it is, being a marketing tool and grabbing attention and looking different enough where it's going to look unique and look modern and have that part of it. So I think sometimes, we get into these kind of like, genre signals. Why does everything look the same type of conversation? But I mean, the fact of the matter is those are there for a very practical reason, right?
Absolutely.
And it's I think a lot of people are like, why doesn't every book look the same? It's like, well, if you're browsing and you see 1,000 books, do you really want to guess? Right? I mean, it's a practical consideration.
And do you want to have to pull everyone off the shelf to be like, okay, what is it? Like, you have to do something attention grabbing.
No, there has to be things, though, that do indicate the genre, like thrillers. There's always like the standard silhouette of the person running with the gun, which I think is kind of goofy, but like it is important because, like, as I'm going back to the romance again, like there are certain things where, like, if I'm looking for a specific book, I'm looking at the cover to tell me what it is. This goes for mystery. This goes for sci-fi. Like, you want to see things. If you want to read a book about aliens, there better be a freaking alien on there or something that indicates there's an alien, right? If you're going to read a book about a thriller, but you want it to be a spy novel, the character has to kind of look like a spy novel, especially for emerging authors. I think sometimes the more established authors can get away with doing a lot more creative things because they've already got an audience. They already know what they're going to be getting when they pick up these books. But with authors that maybe haven't really had a presence and don't really, especially like on social media, like they don't really have a way of saying, this is my book, this is what it's about. The cover has to do all that talking. So yeah, it has to be sometimes they have to stick within these kind of tropes so that the consumer knows what they're going to get.
I love that though, because it is silly when you think about it, when you say like, this horror novel has some like creepy shadows on it because we know something's lurking, but like, we need those signals. And it is really fun for me to look over the years to see like, how did something, especially in like the reference of horror. I don't recall horror when I was a child other than Goosebumps. Like, you weren't calling
Oh,
books
yeah.
horror back then. They were put in different genres, and now it gets to kind of like break out on its own. So when I think of like things that have emerged now, it's fun to look and see like what did those 70s pulp like Stephen King's look like compared to what we're doing now, and the renaissance and the rebirth of some of that design style.
Yeah, gosh, I have so many thoughts on this. like this is like my favorite thing to talk about.
Yeah.
But, you know, when I look back at like older books, especially if we're talking about horror,
Yeah.
think about like Stephen King specifically. And when I was a young kid, I started on R.L. Stein, and I remember reading those Fear Street books. And there was another guy, Christopher Pike, and I would save up my money for these books. And they were these tiny little like 4x6
Like 3x5,
books, right?
yeah.
Yeah. And they
I
were
feel
like
like I have to have
$8,
one
and I would
nearby.
save my babysitting money and buy them. But they all had the same thing. Like they had this kind of spooky text on them. They usually had teenagers running in horror, like
Yep.
they were going to tell you it was a little bit sexy, but not too much, but a little bit and scary, but like, again, not too much.
Right.
But then there were things like Stephen King again, where it's like his name's really the thing that's selling those books. And, you really don't rely so much on all of the details.
Yeah, I think even in some like Stephen King reprints, because every once in a while those are the like audiobook cover you end up with, and it's like the random edition in the middle. I think of Misery. It was giant text Misery, slightly giant Stephen King, just a picture of a typewriter. Like, okay,
Yeah.
I guess that does convey the point, but someone kind of fell asleep at the wheel on this one. So,
well, I mean, like even the stand
Yeah.
cover was just the cover, or even The Godfather, like
Yeah.
it was just the type that really sold it. And that's another thing too, I think that is like maybe not thought of by most people, is like how important typography and fonts become in selling the mood and the vibe and like how you're steering things. Like if you're going to rely a lot on your illustration to get across your idea, then your typography takes a back seat. But I've seen so many covers lately that have come out of other markets where the typography seems really simple, but there's just like enough of like a twist on their like caps or their their
I think
serifs
of
or
like
something that just gives a mood. Yeah.
I think of like in the same horror space, Coffin Moon was a recent release, and it very much harkens to that time. And while of like the Stephen King style, it's a horror vampire novel set in the 70s, I think. And so the vibe is there, and the colors are there, and the imagery is there, but it's the title. And I think that's the big thing, where the typography, the typeface really is what sells that cover.
I've been harping on this for a decade now. Typography is the invisible hero. I mean, it conveys so much information.
For film.
Yeah, for film. I mean, for book covers. I mean, one of the big things in browsability in the digital space is big, simple typography that's legible at whatever 300 pixels on Amazon, I think, is their test. And you have to convey a lot of information, and you can convey a lot of information with typography alone. You know what I mean? If you just put a little drip on the typography, it conveys something. Your font choice, right? If you take the Nike font and try to turn it into a YA novel, it might look weird, right? It's just it's very nuanced, and it's one of those things where I feel like it's important for everybody to know that typography is an incredibly powerful thing.
Definitely.
Absolutely.
That's my PSA for today.
I think that's useful, though, to think of like, there are so many elements here. And I think a lot of times the title can be like put in the back seat when I think of how illustrated a lot of covers have gotten, which, not a complaint. I love a lot. We've gotten so many gorgeous covers over the years where then the authors are like, I'm also selling that as a print because, wow, isn't that stunning? But then you think of like, this composition came together. It works for a reason. When you both get started on a project, are you starting with the typeface? What's your like square one when you're designing a cover?
Well, it's usually communication with the author. I mean, we have a basic questionnaire that we send out when they're signing their contracts that kind of ask what things they're interested in. What books have they seen recently that really grabbed them off the shelves? Do they have fonts that they despise? Like, I'd rather hear what they like. Tell me what you hate so that I don't do that, because I don't want to go through 40 comps of something and it's like, I don't like brush stroke fonts. Please stop that. You're
What
like,
if
"Great,
they
cool,
sent
brilliant."
back, I only want you to put it in papyrus?
Do you know what? I'm going to take that as a challenge and I'm going to be
Yeah.
like on it. Because you know what?
Make it
This is the
work.
thing I'm going to say about papyrus. And this is my soapbox.
Please.
Is like papyrus has a place. So does Comic Sans. Elementary school teachers need Comic Sans. Papyrus, if you see that on a spa, I'm going to tell you right now, it's probably okay.
It's going to be like the best pedicure of your life.
That's right. No, the reason that they're hated is because they were so good at what they did.
Yeah.
They communicated their information so
death.
well
Yeah.
that they were used to death. Then when now designers see that, I cannot look at that one more time. We should feel that way about Futura, to be honest. But that one's such a classic. It's like the palette cleanser of everything. So like when you
Yeah.
have something that's really illustrated, having a nice, clean, simple font that doesn't take away from that is really nice. But when I start from things, it's, we talk to the author about like what they like, and then, working from the covers that they've shared with us, we can kind of piece together what their taste is. It doesn't always work perfectly, because sometimes, an author might have an idea in their head, and then when they see what we've delivered, they're like, that's what I wanted, but I don't like that actually, and that happens a lot. But sometimes it's just a matter of like collecting ideas, reading the book, getting synopses, talking to other people who've read the book, like, making sure that you're kind of getting the vibe on the cover. I don't think it's important to like tell the whole story on the cover.
Sure.
But I think you should have a mood.
Get the taste of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for sure. We're pretty similar in our process. I mean, we do a lot of research into, we work with the author, we work with the acquisitions team. We get input on the cover before we get going. But the way the actual process works, we put together a brief, right? What should this cover be? Big picture. What are the ingredients that should be, encapsulated in it? Does it need to have a bird on it? Is there a particular style? Is there a particular typography, right? And we need to have, it's basically a creative and art direction brief that we send out to designers that has all the different ingredients that they can mix together, basically. But that's essentially the process is getting a sense of what's going to work with the author, and then using our expertise to gather the ingredients and what we think is going to work for an audience based on our expertise.
And y'all are working in the future and in the past at the same time, because I'm sure there's probably, give or take, like a year of lead time when that cover's first being designed, as the book is being finished and getting ready to go to press effectively. Did you do a lot of revisions? Because of course it sounds like a lot of like cross-team collaboration. You're working with the editor, you're working with the author, you're working with design, like you're kind of all over the place. How often do you have something come back like right at the end and you go, we're changing this big time? Like what does the to print look like for both of you?
I mean, typically we have our designs locked down by the time we're doing the advanced reader copies. Like what usually goes on those is usually final.
Mhm.
And that's about 9 months before our release date, or
Give or take.
maybe before print, There are sometimes though that we've had the ARC go and the author decides that is just not what they want, or even our CEO will look at it and be like, this isn't really the direction I want. And it can change. But for the most part, like we are working about a year in advance, and it's what it is. And if it turns out to be a bust, then that's what the paperback's for.
Run to fight.
Yeah, we do a lot of covers. We do a lot of covers. So we have a pipeline. Really, we need to get covers done. There's a deadline that needs to get uploaded by our distribution team. There's a lot of moving pieces that require on that thing getting done. So yeah, there is sort of an element of like when it's done, it's done. There's no more changes, because after it gets uploaded into those systems, then changing it is just, I mean, it's untenable.
Nightmare, yeah.
However, in the design process, yeah, that can be anywhere from a one and done where you know something lands on your desk, you're like, yep, that's it. Everybody agrees. Send it to the author, they agree, and then it's done. And those are great, right? And then we have some that are, they take 9 months, and we've used 3 different designers and 2 different art directors, and it's just like not working, or it's not getting done, or whatever it is. So it's a range of it's a range of experiences, right? You're trying to appeal to a lot of different people, right? The creative director, the art director, the designer all have, need to be unified. The author team, the marketing director, right? Like everybody has a say in this thing. And, if it's not exactly right, sometimes it's just, it needs to go back for revisions. But, we try to keep things efficient when we can.
I mean, that actually brings up another point is like, I think because of the experience that I've had doing this for so long, the kinds of comps that I send out to my authors can be pretty varied. So,
Sure.
when I was in college, my professor used to take my paintings from me because like I would finish it and then I would just start painting over it again. And I've learned in that time that I'm like, I just make a ton of things. I just go through my ideas as fast as I can. I try to get them down. And sometimes by the end of my process, I'll have like 50 concepts. And then I have to lay those out. And then I'll go through and I'll cut them down. And then I'll send them to either my boss or the CEO will look at them and then they cut them down more. And then we'll send, the best ideas. But they can be very wildly different. But it helps because it gives them a bunch of options. And I know not everybody works like this, but like it gives the author a bunch of options to pick from, and then they can see what direction they want to go. And then from there, we can kind of nudge like where, the design direction needs to go.
Yeah, I like both of those kind of process mind frames. I know I have to let both of you go shortly here, but have you ever seen a cover that has just completely changed or broken the game where you go, oh, we have to do things differently now? Or have you had covers that you put out in the world that the reception was just like, oh, they're loving this. Now we have to try to bring that spark to the next project?
Yes. Most recently, again, just because, Lit RPG is such a big thing we do, is Dungeon Crawler Carl.
Oh my God, my husband's obsessed.
Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah. Well, Lit RPG has very much been a fantasy sci-fi aesthetic in the past, right? Sort of like genre fiction. But Will Staley, who's incredible, did the new covers for Dungeon Crawler Carl. And to be honest with you, I think it opened up so many doorways into what this genre can evolve to be. I was so excited by him because, right, like, of course, you want to push things into a performance direction, which looks a certain way. But when you get a big hit like this that can redefine the entire aesthetic of a genre, it's super exciting. So I think that's the most prescient example.
That's such a good point. I won't be surprised when we see so many takes on the Dungeon Crawler Carl aesthetic and setup in the next like year and a half alone.
Yeah. I'm excited.
Yeah. Good problem to have, right?
Yeah. New is good.
I'm trying to think of anything that has been game changing. It just seems like it's always a moving target.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah,
I have a harder time, and especially like I was saying, in the past 5 years, things have changed an enormous amount. Whereas I think I used to see book covers that would really grab me and just have my mind be like, I don't know why I do this, and I should just quit. I'm never gonna,
I'm never gonna make that.
I'm done. I guess I'm old now. No.
I get that once a week.
Ooh, yeah,
Right?
time to wrap it up.
I think that's part of the creative process is like you have to see somebody do something that you're like, wow, I think I should quit my job.
Right. There's something about like forcing you to kill your darlings of just like, this version of me doesn't exist anymore.
I think that is absolutely the root of it is like, you're constantly coming up against things that are changing your perspective. And as a creative person, you do have to like challenge yourself. And you're like, you can either be like, well, I'm done, I can't do this anymore, which a lot of creative people do. It's like, they get to a point where they cannot deal with that constant like change or the constant competition or whatever. And then there's others who are just like, okay, give me a moment. I'm going to think about this for a minute, and then I'm going to see what I can do to come back. Because, especially with the smaller companies like Blackstone specifically, we have to be versatile. We have to be able to change and do a lot of things. Whereas I feel like there are a lot of designers and illustrators who work for bigger companies, and they have a specific style. Like when you look at Jessica Hish typography, that's her because it's very, very specific to her, right? You look at certain illustrators and you can immediately pick them out because you're like, that's them. But for me, I've had to learn to do every possible kind of design style because we don't have a huge team. We've got like 5 designers on our team, and then we're just trying to wear all the hats. And, it was like I was saying with like the Helldivers, it's like the super sci-fi, Halo-esque kind of series. And I had to illustrate in a style that I had never tried before. And it was very stressful because like, book 1 was really good. It was like a lot of compositing, and it wasn't too bad. It was like these guys fly, parachuting out of their airships. And then but book 2, I spent a lot of time hand drawing this soldier with this weapon, and he's in this, apocalyptic landscape. And it took me 6 weeks. But like, that's not a tenable thing for me to do because I have like at any given time, I can have 12 books on my plate. Like,
right.
I don't have time to spend 6 weeks doing that.
Right. There aren't 6 weeks chilling anywhere.
No, but from that, we were able to take somebody who, was good at 3D modeling, and they created that character. And then we can just like plop them into things, and it became a whole other way of making stuff. So like a lot of this is just the challenges that come up, and then how quickly you're able to adapt and, meet the needs.
For both of you being in like a growing indie space, is it exciting to have to wear all of these hats? Like, I'm sure we all want like one more staff member. That's always like the ever-present thing. But do you enjoy this challenge of constantly having to learn new things and challenging your style and challenging your vision?
I love it.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think
perfectly in sync too.
I couldn't imagine doing anything else because my job is never the same job from month to month. It is like, it's like I said, we started audiobooks, and then we went to print about 10 years ago, and we had nobody to show us how to do it. So we had to figure out from the ground up. And this has been the way it's always been, is like, we just kind of like try and fail until we find the path that works out, and then we just moving.
Wow.
But yeah, I mean, I like the fact that it's always something different, like from celebrity books to having to illustrate, like, we did illustrations for R.L. Stine recently, to like our public domain books, which have to be, a variety of things.
Oh, yeah.
They're all just fun. So,
yeah. Doing the same thing day in, day out frightens me on like an existential level. I need every day to be different, or
you can't be right. You can't be a creative person in a creative field and then go, here's a box, go sit in that.
Yeah. I can't do it.
Or be told like, hey, you did that thing once. Can you do that again forever? Like,
this is actually your job now, is that one thing.
That would be like brain death. Like I could not I need to be challenged. Like I want to, like, if I'm doing something the same time over and over again, I will happily hand that off after a while because I'm like, I can't keep doing it. So 6 weeks creating a character is not, yes, it was terrifying, but it's not terrifying at the same time. Yeah. It's like, it's a challenge. It's more like, okay, let's see if I'm gonna actually pull this off. Or if I'm gonna embarrass myself. Now, are there any trends, before I let you both go, that you see on the way out in covers, and any that you see as like the next thing that you think everyone's going to be leaning into?
I think I'm surprised we got through this entire podcast without talking about AI, since it's like,
Oh my God, that was exactly what I was
everywhere.
about to say too.
It's
Oh
like
my goodness.
breathing right now. It's like I can't open up my feed without seeing it on every article.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's impossible to talk about trends without talking a little bit about AI. I mean, I think from my perspective, I think there's going to be two camps. There's going to be those who adopt the technology. And then there's going to be people who resist it. So I think right now it's pretty new. So I think you're going to see kind of a lot of, AI slop, just kind of generic AI covers, which is unsurprising. But I think for those who do adopt it, it's a powerful tool, right? Like, little dirty secret, like designers have used stock for years, right? And they find pre-existing images, and then they manipulate it to make it into the design they want. And I think I've dug through stock websites for hours and hours and hours on end trying to find the image that I know is in my head, and I can't find it. I finally find it, and it cost me like $100, blah, blah, blah. So I think, there are those very I guess responsible uses of AI that I think we're going to start seeing more and more sort of permeate the industry. But then I think the more immediate trend that we're going to see is a lot of hand-drawn stuff, a lot of stuff that is like, hey, look, this is not AI. I think that's going to be one of the biggest trends that we start to
clear,
see.
like a person did this.
Yeah.
I'm 100% agree with him. I think there are probably two camps. I am absolutely in the resistance because I don't like. My opinion about AI is that it's handy. You can make things really quickly, but in the scheme of things, when we read books, we're reading about the human experience. When people talk about trying to make books that AI are writing, nobody wants to read a book that a machine is telling you about the human experience. That is absolutely garbage.
Right.
And it's the same thing I feel about the cover art. We're trying to interpret this book about the human experience for another human. When we go to AI, you can't even sell them in foreign markets. They won't buy them because they at least have some ethics, I think. And I'm probably going to get a lot of hate about that, but I despise it. I think it's one thing when you're using it to set up your layouts and stuff. I think a lot of designers can do it that way. It gives you ideas for composition. I have not particularly, I've played around with it and I've not been impressed. I find it to be just as tedious as going through stock photos, which I also despise. If they could use AI to give me better search engine capabilities, I would love that. But I don't really want to see them giving me, I don't know. I just, I think there are some things where it's nice where it can take a face and it can turn it or whatever. But again, it's very limited and you still have to go in and do a ton of work on it. So in my opinion, I think that there's going to be a backlash against it because I don't think that people want to have the human experience interpreted by a machine. I think people are going to be drawn towards more physical things. And especially since so much of the market is ebooks, if you're going to buy a book, I think you want to buy a book that actually gives you some kind of experience with it. That's why you see all of these specialty books that have the 3D edges printed, which we do at Blackstone a lot. I think there's going to be a lot more like Ryan said, hand illustrated pieces, actual art that's being put into the books. Maybe we'll even see, a special market for things that are being handmade because as we've moved towards digital printing, we have all these books that have that perfect binding on the edge and they're not the same long-lasting quality, I think.
Yeah, it's not as organic.
There's something that. There's something about having more human touch in an object that gives it more value or something, I guess. And
totally.
I don't know.
Totally.
Well, and as the cost of things rise all around us, we as consumers, as enjoyers, as readers want to know that the money that we're putting into something is going to the people who created it. And, if that book is $30 because, that print run paid everyone who worked on that book, great. If that book is $30 and it didn't really go to an actual, if it went to a bottom line and not an artist who created things, you're a little more oh, well, you didn't have to pay a person to do that. So why is it the same? Why is it the same cost?
Yeah, I mean, like somebody once said, it's so great because we can use AI and we can have a new designer come in and they can have the same level of skill as somebody who's been in the industry for 20 years. And in my mind, I'm like, okay, that's great for the bottom line, but that's really kind of a garbage thing to say because that's a loss of skill. That's one of the things that AI is doing too, is it's a loss of skill. And it's not like it's pulling from nowhere. It's stealing from other artists.
Right.
And then you're diminishing the actual talent of people who could be using this time to like build their skills up over years. And instead they're just relying on technology. It just makes you dumber. I just feel like
I don't think it's even true that it can replace people yet.
Right.
I mean, I think that's the whole like corporate dream is the, you know what I mean? Is like, let's just automate all these humans or whatever. But I just don't think it can. I mean, of course, I've played around with, first of all, I think I legally need to state that Podium has no AI policy. We do not use generative AI in our works.
We don't.
But of course, I've played around with the tools and it's not there. I mean, you still need to have a good design sense. You still need to understand, creative strategy. You still need to have taste. You still need to understand a market. I mean, it's a nice tool, but I think this dream of it, like, you running a $100 million business with 0 humans is just like not feasible. And especially like in the creative field, our entire business is based on the fact that humans make things for other humans. Right. So I think it's going to be a slower adoption, especially in our industry, because it's like, why? I mean, every piece of art, I think, has that sort of that backstory of like, that's impressive because somebody did that. Right. Like when you go when you see somebody, an amazing piece of work of art on somebody's wall, when you go into their room, it's impressive because somebody did that. Right. And when you lose that backstory, it's like, who cares? Right. I mean, if you see AI prints on somebody's walls, who cares? It's like, it's not impressive. It's not interesting. It's not, I mean, there's nothing behind it. So I think it's just kind of a weird, God, this could be an entire separate podcast, couldn't it?
Oh, it absolutely could, because there's so much about this. I mean, like my kids are teenagers and they can spot AI expertly. Like I get fooled all the time and they make fun of me because I'm just that generation. But like, they'll be like, Mom, how can you not tell that's AI? And I'm like, because it looks like everything else. I just think,
we're
like
constantly bombarded.
Yeah. And it's that meme, like it takes like a bag of chips and a Mountain Dew to make a piece of art, but it takes AI like the power of a nuclear reactor.
Right.
It's just a waste of resources.
Right.
Like, why do we need to drain the entire water, like the water of an entire city to make one piece of art, or like have somebody write their stupid email when they could just maybe take a minute, pause, write their email about the business, and the fish still live. It just seems
Imagine that.
weird. Like, I don't know. I don't want to live in the Matrix. That's not really my goal.
Please, no, I don't want to. If listeners could walk away knowing one thing about what the two of you do in a day and how creating covers means to you, kind of putting books out there in the world, what would it be?
Oh my gosh. I mean, most of my day comes about talking to people I work with, making sure that all the pieces are getting where they need to go, that everybody's got what they need, that they're like, have a place to like bounce ideas off of. But being able to like do this, like I think about my 15-year-old self, and the time I spent in bookstores that don't really exist anymore.
Yeah.
And the idea that this is now what I get to do for a living is like spend all day with books, think about books, make pictures for books, talk to other people about books. It's incredible. So, I mean,
it's just love.
Fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's as fun as it looks.
I work long hours to do it.
Totally. It's a passionate business for sure. I mean, it's fun. It's fun. Honestly, if I could leave listeners with one thing about, what I do is it's fun. I mean, it really is. And even as a professional necessity, it's fun, right? When you stop having fun, you start making boring work. So, I don't know. Yeah. It's fun.
Well, I think that was one of the goals I had as a kid too, is like, I needed something that was going to get me out of bed, that was going to make it worth it. Because like, And I'm not saying that other people's jobs are boring, but like everybody's got to find their niche, their thing that they are specifically really good at. And making pictures and reading books was mine.
and you monetized it. You made it your life.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, Kathryn, Ryan, thank you so much for joining me today and for sharing a bit behind the scenes.
Yeah, super fun. I love this.
Listeners, thank you for joining us for this episode. Make sure you're commenting, subscribing to all that stuff because you won't want to miss next week's conversation. It's incredible. I won't tell you too much. Just make sure you're following along so you can see it then. Happy reading.
You can sample and borrow the books from today's episode in the Libby app, or if you're a librarian, find them for purchase in Overdrive Marketplace. Book Lounge by Libby is a proud Evergreen Podcast signature program. Explore more amazing shows at evergreenpodcasts.com. This podcast is produced and recorded by me, Joe Skelly, with editing by Andrew Alonso. Our theme music is High Five by Rex Banner, used with permission. Book Lounge by Libby is presented by the Libby app. Learn more at libbylife.com/booklounge.